Sai Ram, Vanakkam, Namaskar, Vandanam, Assalamu Alaikum, and Sat Sri Akal. We look at something called contentment today, having looked at, something along similar lines in the last 2 weeks. So what is contentment? Because a lot of people tend to confuse, happiness with contentment. And then, of course, there's a higher leverage of, if you like happiness, if you like contentment, that is called bliss. So happiness, contentment, and bliss, do they all mean the same thing, or are they all different? And if so, to what extent are they different? Well, contentment has a prerequisite, which is happiness, right? And bliss has a prerequisite called contentment. So the way I work it out is you need to be happy before you become contented. And in that state of consistent contentment, one begets bliss. So being in a state of constant satisfaction, happiness, I would say that is contentment. Where there is complete complacency, if you like, or a sense of fulfillment, some form of gratification, a pleasure, or a feeling, a sense of serenity, a sense of equanimity. Then one can properly describe oneself as being in a state of contentment, or I am content. How many times have you used the word content as opposed to using the word unhappy? So there's always this a crossover between happiness and contentment. I think you need to be happy first before you are contented, and then you need to be contented before you become blissful. You see, like the Buddha, right? The Buddha was always quoted to be in a state of bliss because he was always seen as being contented. That's the difference between human beings and those of a higher spiritual consciousness, the rishis, the sadhus, the saints, and the sages. The humans transgress between happiness and contentment and sadness. They just jump from one to the other with no, sense of consistency. One day you're happy, one day you're sad, one day you're content, so on and so forth. Why? Well, it's down to desires, down to wants, right? You just focus on what you need, then perhaps you'll be less happy, but more contented, happy with yourself. So the answer there is, living with one's needs as opposed to living with the desire of wanting more and more and more. So I'll tell you a story about a wealthy businessman who went fishing in his big yacht. And then he went and parked, and then, in a while, he saw a little boat with one fisherman and his child on there. And the fisherman threw his, fishing line into the river, into the waters, and, he's just fishing. And then, he found, something tugged at his line. So he pulled. It was a nice big fish. So he caught that and put it in a basket. And then he was talking and playing with his son. And then he pulled back his fishing line. He stopped fishing. And this businessman who was basking on his yacht looked at this fellow down there in the boat and said, "Hey, you, why aren't you fishing?" At to which the fisherman said, "Oh, I caught one fish already." And then he says, "Well, why don't you catch some more?" To which the fisherman said, "Well, what would I do with them?" And then the guy says, "Well, if you caught more, you could sell more fish, which means you could get more money. With more money, you could perhaps buy yourself a bigger boat and then catch more fish. And then with that money, after the sales, you could buy a bigger boat and, and at the end of the day, you could be having many boats, and then you could just be relaxing and enjoying life." So the fisherman, with a horrid look on his face, looked at the businessman and say, "Enjoying life? What do you think I'm doing now?" What do you think I'm doing now? See, the guy caught a fish, one fish, right? Perhaps that's what he and his son needs for the day. He was happy. After that, he was enjoying his time with the son. I'd like you to consider this. Yeah. I mean, money, wealth, contentment are not necessarily linked. Money, wealth, contentment are not necessarily linked. If they were, there would be no such thing as a miserable rich person or a happy poor person. Very important. If they were, there would be no such thing as a miserable rich person or a happy poor person. But, on self-reflection, what do you think is the main ingredient for a life worth living, brimming with inner peace and contentment? Remember, Buddha said contentment is the greatest form of wealth, right? And the great philosopher, Crystal Payne said contentment is a state of the heart, unaffected by outward circumstances, right? Vivekananda said health is the greatest gift. Contentment is the greatest wealth. Faithfulness is the best relationship. I mean, he said it in context. To be content, doesn't mean you don't desire more. Listen to this very carefully, right? To be content does not mean you do not desire more. It simply means you are thankful for what you have and patient for what is to come. Until I see you next week, stay blessed.